We have right here Joseph Kishore and Jerry White running for the Socialist Equality Party 2024. And here's the announcement right now as I'm scrolling.
Cheers.
This is where a producer would come in so handy.
I'm Joseph Kishore, the presidential candidate for the Socialist Equality Party. I'm here with vice presidential candidate Jerry White at a rally in Detroit against the escalating genocide in Gaza. It's a very powerful response to our campaign to get on the ballot in Michigan. There is enormous opposition in Detroit and throughout the United States and around the world to the genocide in Gaza. Jerry and I are making a number of central points as we speak to workers and youth here. First, this is a genocide made in Washington. It's not just Netanyahu that's responsible, it's the Biden administration, it's the American ruling class as a whole. Second, the genocide in Gaza is part of an expanding global war that has to be understood in relationship to the US-NATO war against Ukraine and the developing war and provocations against Iran and China. The fight against genocide is necessarily a fight against imperialism, US-NATO imperialism. Third, the fight against imperialism is a fight against capitalism. It's the root of all the problems that mankind confronts. And fourth, the fight against capitalism must be led by the working class, the basic revolutionary force. We're fighting for an orientation to the building of a socialist movement in the working class, connecting the fight against genocide with the fight against imperialism, with a fight for the interests of the working class against capitalist exploitation. Again, a very powerful response here in Detroit. It is in the initial stages of our campaign to get on the ballot. We encourage all workers and youth in Michigan and throughout the country to support this campaign, donate, help us get on the ballot, and help to build a socialist leadership in the working class. Thank you.
So what an entrance. I love it. We are now welcoming Mr. Joe Kishore and Mr. Jerry White to the show. How are you both, gentlemen? Welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Hi, very good. Very good. Thank you for having us. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us tonight.
We are thrilled, and someone wrote in the comments, you both are putting us to shame with your fancy get-ups there. You look much more professional than Pat and I do, so please forgive us. My household was on strike for 8 months over here, so we're I'm wearing a shirt that's about 6 years old. Thank you for being here. Why don't you please tell us something about why you're running and what your platform is? I mean, I know we saw from the video, but maybe if you could expound a bit on that.
Sure. Well, that video was a video shot at the rally against the genocide in Detroit. I would encourage everyone watching as well to go to our website, socialism2024.org, where the announcement videos from the party's national chairman, David North, as well as Jerry and myself, outline the basis of the campaign and the issues that we're raising. I would say at its root, we're fighting for the development of an understanding in the working class that all the problems that workers confront, of course, the expanding war is central to it, but massive levels of social inequality, the growth of dictatorship, fascism, capitalist exploitation, the pandemic, climate change, all of these are expressions of capitalism, and the solution to the problems confronting the working class is socialism. That is the reorganization of society on a world scale. Internationalism is very much at the center of this campaign. We're fighting to develop an understanding of the working class in the U.S. and throughout the world that socialism is the necessary way forward, that capitalism is producing barbarism throughout the world, and that the necessary response is socialism. I would say is the basis of the campaign. Of course, there's many different elements of it.
So I think sorry, Jerry. Would you like? And may I call you both by your first names? I took the liberty with yours. Yes. Jerry, did you want to add anything before I start asking questions? Before we jump in?
Well, certainly the capitalist two-party system in the United States, in fact, excludes the broad masses of working people. We have a situation where you have Biden Biden, who's an out-and-out warmonger, supporter of the genocide, supporter of reckless confrontation with Russia and China. And then you have a would-be dictator who is exploiting the social discontent over economic distress in order to channel it into anti-immigrant hysteria and anti-communism. So we're seeking through, as Joe indicated, seeking through our campaign to appeal to the working class, which is increasingly entering political life, being radicalized, and to offer a political program based on internationalism and socialism.
Yeah, there's so many aspects of what you're both saying and running on that I think I and our whole audience are so appreciative of. One of the major parts of it is the international aspect, because I think, especially this summer, my husband first was on strike with the Writers Guild, and then I, as an actress, was on strike. And there was a real marked difference between the Writers Guild strike of 2007-8 and this one. There were younger people, there were more people of color. It was more militant, the way people were talking. They are ripe for this kind of movement. And what, I think you might know, I met on the line my very first day showing up to the SAG strike. I met two writers from WSWS, Mark Wells and Jacob Cross, and we had a great conversation and continued, and they introduced us to David Walsh, who was a guest, wonderful. And one of the things that they kept trying to impart to the people who were passing was, obviously the heads of SAG are no match for the heads of studios. And even the president isn't necessarily a match for these international conglomerates without gathering a broad coalition internationally. So I love that aspect. How does that work practically? How do we get to that, where we engage people across the world?
Well, I would just say, first of all, the question of internationalism is bound up with the nature of the crisis of capitalism, which is a global crisis, and it's expressed perhaps most clearly in the escalating war. I mean, there is no national solution. In fact, the problems that are produced by capitalism are very much bound up with the existence of the nation-state system itself and the conflict with the global economy, which is expressed in the most brutal manner in war, imperialist war. The working class objectively is an international class. It's united throughout the world in its relationship to production, the fact that gigantic corporations are exploiting workers all over the world. And so there's a powerful objective foundation for the international unity of the working class and the development of a politically unified global movement. I mean, in terms of how it's done, well, there's many perhaps answers to that question, but the ability of workers and young people to communicate internationally now is really unprecedented. I mean, you have, of course, the persistent efforts at censorship of the internet, but the ability of young people to communicate, to follow what is happening throughout the world, to organize opposition. I mean, there's an objective basis. I think that in terms of our own work, we have the Socialist Equality Party. We're part of an international movement, the International Committee of the Fourth International. We publish the World Socialist website, which is an international publication. We've initiated the fight for international organization through the International Workers Alliance of Rank and File Committees. That is the development of really global, internationally organized mechanism for working class struggle. I think, though, that the most fundamental question is the development of the political understanding among workers of the necessity for an international perspective. A perspective that unites workers all over the world, and workers of all, ethnicities, races, genders, and nationalities within every country.
And I really see, I mean, it's kind of obvious to most people, but Palestine is a rallying cry that can get people on board with our socialist beliefs. And it's where the young people are emotionally, spiritually, they're invested in Palestine. And I think it's interesting, and I appreciate you guys for masking and for still pursuing the pandemic discourse. That was a failed opportunity. It's a missed, I wouldn't say failed opportunity, pardon me on that, but I wonder why we let that go. Like that should be an international rallying cry for workers that is totally absent in the political discourse right now. I know. How do you plan on bringing that into your campaign, somewhat? I guess.
Well, one thing, first of all, Pat, as when the pandemic was first spreading across the world, there was actually a spontaneous movement of workers beginning in Italy that spread to Canada, spread to the auto plants in the United States, in which workers actually shut down production in defiance of the trade union apparatuses and the governments, who were all demanding that these workers are essential, and of course we're more concerned about profits than workers' lives. But what we warned about at the time was that the response to the pandemic would be conditioned by the existing social relations of capitalism and the nation-state system. So, what was first pronounced by Boris Johnson about let the bodies pile high was adopted by every country in the world, at first with the exclusion of China, which conducted a zero COVID policy. But they were then put under immense pressure by Apple and Disney and all the transnational corporations, and the capitalist regime in China then lifted all restrictions and led to the deaths of 1 million people. And that demonstrated the total inviability of a national response to what is a global process. And of course, all the problems, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the environment, whether it's war, whether it's inflation, these are global problems. But the political systems and the trade union bureaucracies, which are all nationalist, subordinate the working class to the interests of their, quote, own capitalists in a vicious competition, pitting workers against each other in a race to the bottom, and ultimately sending workers to kill each other over which transnational corporation will control oil or lithium or cobalt. And as Joe indicated, our movement is an international movement. Our movement is rooted in the struggle against all the betrayals of socialism by social democracy or Stalinism, which were nationalist. And our movement is based on the international principles that were fought for by Leon Trotsky in the Fourth International.
If I might just make a point, in relationship to the pandemic, and first of all, it's not over. In a very direct sense, that it's still in the United States, 1,000 people are dying every week. You have 20 million people who are impacted by long COVID, which is just ignored by the whole media. It's treated as if it's treated, of course, as if the pandemic is over, and it's not. And of course, the virus still evolves. I would just say, because you asked the question of sort of, why isn't that this is sort of rallying cry? I would say, first of all, I think the pandemic has had a profound impact on, millions and millions of people, and people don't really understand, or they haven't really sort of worked through the implications of the experience of this. But 20 million, 25 million, 27, I don't know the latest estimates, 27 million people dead throughout the world, over 1.4 million in the United States. This has been a colossal experience and a colossal crime by the ruling class. But of course, there has been so much misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. Jerry mentioned, the workers walked out at the beginning. Then it was back to work, and the line was, the cure can't be worse than the disease. First proposed by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, and then picked up by Donald Trump, and that became the mantra. You can't, in other words, don't let human life get in the way of profit and the markets. They handed trillions, but there's been so much misinformation. People just don't really know. But one thing we have found, because as you noted, we wear masks when we go out in public and speak to workers. When we explain what's happening, also at public meetings where we very strongly urge everyone to wear a mask and observe precautions. We have, UV lights and other things to try to make sure that people are as safe as possible. When we explain it, people are very willing to take the measures. It's really that, that the whole political establishment. I would also add all this. I mean, it's not even a political issue. Outside of the Socialist Equality Party, there's not a political tendency that is making the pandemic an issue. That includes Cornel West. It includes various so-called independent candidates for president. They're outside of and this has characterized the pandemic as a whole. The ICFI, the World Socialist website, has treated the pandemic as a political question requiring not only a scientific response, and we've done a lot on the science of COVID to make people aware, but it requires a political response and a political struggle to oppose a society in which human life is subordinated to profit.
Yeah, I mean, even when we cover COVID every week, and I have not been indoors without a mask in public for 4 years, so I'm so grateful when I see, because as you said, lots of third-party candidates who I had hoped would be doing better, especially on this issue, are indoors hugging their supporters. Nobody's wearing a mask, and all I see is COVID virus spreading and variants growing. But at the beginning, before Biden sort of successfully manufactured the end of the pandemic on paper, every single poll, even in red states, where people like to be like, oh, well, you voted red, so you deserve to die, which was horrific to see our politicians saying that, said, hey, let us know, because when it's serious, we'll mask. We still want to mask. We don't want to send our kids back to school, because they know they don't have the fancy private schools with the purified air and the good ventilation and the small classrooms. And so even when Leanna Wen and Ashish Jha and all those people were writing their articles for the Washington Post and New York Times, David Leonhardt, the people, working class people, were still very much attuned to the fact that they were repeatedly getting sick. Their kids are like, you're not supposed to get the flu 3 times a year, the flu, whatever they want to call it now, right? So I think people are just hungry for somebody to lead them. Right now, there feels like there's no end in sight, because our government we have no social safety net. We have no government looking out for us. We're defunding scientific endeavors. 4 years in, we still don't have a good treatment. We don't have good tests, right? So anyway, I just want to say I very much appreciate that you are highlighting that and bringing attention to it, as you are also talking about other issues.
Yeah, and they exploit the fact no end in sight. I mean, of course, there's no individual solution as well. In the end, it is a social question,
Right.
And to the extent people don't understand what the possibility is for stopping not only the COVID pandemic but all viruses, to really make an extraordinary advance in public health. But that requires a coordinated, society-wide and global response, which is impossible under capitalism. But I do think this has been because, as you said, I mean, everyone really knows someone who's been impacted, and now there's 1,000 people dying, mainly the elderly or those who have disability. There's a real eugenicist element to the ruling class policy. Well, just let them die. We're spending too much on their health care anyway, and that could go better to funding the military and bailouts for the rich. I mean, there is that real element in the policy of the ruling class. But I do think this has been the sort of political impact of the pandemic has not concluded.
Right.
The pandemic has included the political consequences. And when people really realize and understand, of course, that's what our campaign is about in the broadest sense of developing an understanding in the working class. When they do that, understand the consequences of what the ruling class did, the normalization, and is doing, the normalization of mass death is going to be profound, or it will be profoundly radicalizing.
There are many workers who use the phrase that we're just numbers, that our lives are meaningless, and certainly that's what the capitalist system demonstrated. Yeah. Just recently, we had a couple of writers from the WSWS out at a picket line in Anheuser-Busch in Fort Worth, Texas, and workers talked about being kept on the job as supposedly essential workers producing beer, and knowing many people who died. So I think the further discrediting of the whole profit system is very much a process that's ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and it's such a clear overlap, as you said, with the capitalist imperialist system. It's been shocking to both Pat and me to see so many former allies hold on only to the anti-war aspect of everything that I thought we were in together, because and I think it's because of distrust of government now, but many of them COVID minimizers. Some of them employ, anti-trans language, which is upsetting. And even so far as like starting to deny climate change, or like George Galloway, for instance, who just had this great blowout on his anti-war platform last week, but then proudly says he's anti-quackery, by which he means he's a COVID minimizer, anti-green, and anti-woke. And, that feels like, well, then, like, what exactly are you? You're against this one war, against all war? What's the ideology? And it feels sort of like a little bit lost at sea. So I would imagine that your platform encompasses everything that we're all sort of fearful of as we see impending doom on many different many different areas coming at, hurtling towards us. So I don't know if you wanted to then talk, like, maybe how we move towards the wars that we're trying to spread, or if you want to talk about, we want to start with that, our ongoing genocide, support of genocide.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, we've gone from the normalization of mass death in the pandemic to the normalization of genocide in Gaza, and the normalization of nuclear war in relationship to the U.S.-NATO war against Russia, yeah. Which, it's been the subject of a lot of the conversations that Jerry and I have had with young people who are protesting, and workers protesting the genocide in Gaza, which certainly has galvanized enormous anger, hostility, and outrage all over the world.
Right.
But to understand this, I mean, how is this possible? It's not only, as I was saying in that video at the beginning, a crime made in Washington, but has to be really seen as part of a developing global war. And right now, the central priority of Biden is to get additional funding for the Ukraine war, to escalate the war against Russia. To the point where, I mean, they were talking in the New York Times, there was an article last week where it was revealed that the Biden administration had calculated that the risk of nuclear war was 50-50 earlier in the conflict. But their position is, whatever they will not be deterred in the escalation of the war and to victory against Russia. But it is an expanding global war, and it's it's expression of capitalist barbarism. But I think that really has to be understood as these are products of capitalism. You're talking about the sort of political confusions promoted by different. I mean, Cornel West, I was just watching earlier today. He was at the Libertarian Convention of California, I think this past weekend, and he was talking about various libertarian candidates who have the platform, including in their platform, is the end of all business regulations. The abolition of the income tax, his brothers and et cetera, in the struggle. I mean, and of course, there was immense confusion in the reactionary Rage Against the War Machine rally, which was held earlier where a lot of these figures came together. Jill Stein as well, the Green Party, with far right forces, really fascistic forces, on the common ground of opposing the war in Ukraine. But it all is, I mean, the basic question is the development of a movement against capitalism, and the development of a movement in the working class against capitalism. And you can't fight against war without fighting against capitalism. You can't fight against dictatorship without fighting against capitalism. And I think that, that is, and the question of internationalism, which arises again and again in relationship to all of these tendencies. But this is, I mean, humanity confronts a developing global catastrophe in the war, and it has to be stopped. The American imperialism has to be stopped. The U.S. NATO imperialism, but that is only going to be that is only possible through the development of a movement in the working class and an understanding in the work. And there's not broad popular support among workers for the war either.
No.
There just isn't. But there has to be an understanding of the connection between the fight of the working class against exploitation and inequality and the fight against war and against capitalism.
And of course, all of the capitalist governments in Europe or in the United States, intend to make the working class pay for these wars, both in human costs and financial costs. In Europe, of course, last year, Macron raised the retirement age. There were mass protests, and he used the executive fiat to impose a raising of the retirement age. And in all of the European capitalist governments, they're saying we must convert to wartime economies. The peace dividend is over. We now have a, quote, freedom investment, which is required as German imperialism gets its tanks going with its bullseye on Russia once again. And it's the same thing here. There are think tanks. There are think tanks. The Center for Strategic and International Studies put out a new report last week called Rebuilding the Arsenal of Democracy, which is a reference, to the World War II conversion of the auto industry to build bombs and so on. Of course, this doesn't have anything to do with democracy. It has to do with an arsenal of genocide and nuclear war. But in it, they actually said, America is trailing China's advances in military. This is a country that spends more than the next 10 countries combined. But they argue that there must be an increase in spending, and therefore the working class has to produce more guns, more weaponry, and must accept cuts in Social Security, Medicare, and so on. And we've already seen the growth of huge strikes over inflation, over, the writers and, of course, the actors were part of that, but auto workers, academic workers, other sections of workers last year. Right now, there's a huge strike of railway workers and Lufthansa workers in Germany that follows a mass strike in Nigeria, textile workers in Egypt, Argentine, airline workers, French workers are threatening to strike during the Olympics. And this movement objectively is in response to the demands of all capitalist governments that the workers pay for it. But if I could just make one other point, that Biden had the president of the United Auto Workers Union, Sean Fain, in the gallery as a guest of honor at the State of the Union address last week. And that's because the union bureaucracy is being brought in a modern version of the arsenal of democracy to suppress strikes, to impose the dictates of big business. And of course, Fain endorsed Biden at a UAW convention where UAW members were dragged out of the convention for demanding a ceasefire. So, as Lenin would refer to the socialist in words and the imperialist in deeds, this is the bureaucracy, and of course the DSA and others that defend American imperialism.
They say they don't take any corporate money, but then they vote along with the people who do. So what difference does it make? Right?
Yeah,
Either
I just wanted to add along the lines of internationalism and how all these issues do converge and how it really is about forming an anti-capitalist solidarity across all these issues. You know, the oil independence is now being used to minimize climate control steps. They're saying now that because of all these wars, well, we really do need to be independent and allow ourselves to build up more oil reserves and whatnot. And so they're going to use that to fight against climate protection. They're using these wars that they fund as an excuse to still fund, to basically give handouts to all their corporate buddies and the, you know. And so where do we go from there? How do we break through on these issues where the public does support the positions that we hold, but we see, like the genocide in Israel, in Gaza, that it's not having an impact like we want it to. And so they are going to spin this and get their PR think tanks out there to try to put a different spin on all this and change public opinion to accept the war or whatever happens. But how do we change that? How do we make a dent in this?
Well, the media churns out lies and no one believes it, increasingly. There's a powerful objective basis for a development of a real fight against capitalism. I mean, what Jerry was raising, the growth of the class struggle all over the world. You had millions and millions of people protesting the genocide. The political institutions are deeply discredited. All the parties. I mean, the Democratic Party. I mean, it can't really move beyond. I mean, the genocide. And then you have people like, as Jerry was saying, the DSA, Bernie Sanders. Who won a lot of support from young people. Talking about a political revolution. He's now Biden's chief surrogate to go around and provide him with political cover. So there is a powerful basis for the development of a movement for socialism, but it's a political fight. That's what we're doing in the election, in this election campaign. We're fighting for a socialist understanding in the working class, for an understanding, and that's very much connected with a historical understanding. What happened in the 20th century. I mean, the question of the development of a socialist consciousness is a political fight. It's something that people have to make a decision that they're going to take up. They're going to join and fight and build a socialist movement. It doesn't happen automatically. But I think people are coming to the realization that there's no tinkering around the edges,
right,
to solve the problems. I mean, we would confront basic questions. The whole structure of society, the whole political system is rotten to the core, and not only in the U.S. but all over the world. And the society in which we live is historically bankrupt. I think people are beginning to see that. But then the question now is, all right, well, we have to fight to develop a conscious political understanding. David North, in the introduction to the election campaign, makes the point that we're not, this campaign isn't about the lowest common denominator. We're not, just sort of shouting empty slogans and trying to, get people on that. It's a political fight, political struggle to develop a socialist understanding and a socialist consciousness and international. There's a powerful objective, again, basis, but it's something that has to be fought for. I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, people have to make the decision to, all right, well, now's the time to take this up and build it.
So in that regard, two questions. One is, it seems to me that the way really to affect change would be some sort of massive general international strike, just withholding labor from the people who profit off of all of us. But for the two of you, as you are venturing forward in your campaign, what's your next step? Like, I know you're gathering signatures in Michigan. Are you going state to state? Are you how are you engaging people who are so hungry for the change that you want to bring?
Well, I think the central issue in our campaign, of course, we're fighting to get onto ballots in Michigan and other states, and against the completely undemocratic ballot access system. But above all, we're fighting to raise the political consciousness of the working class, to develop the understanding that the war and inequality, the threat of fascism and dictatorship are not going to be ended through the reform of the capitalist system. Of course, millions of people have marched throughout the world against the genocide for 5 months, and their sentiments, their will has been completely ignored by all the powers that be. And right now, as Joe is indicating, I mean, revolutionary conclusions emerge when all of the old avenues of social change are blocked off.
Right.
And of course, all the official organizers of these protests, including figures like Galloway or the DSA in the United States, all of them argue that you can persuade the powers that be through appeals to their conscience or even shaking your fist at them to change their ways, as if it was just up to Sunak or Biden or any of the other capitalist politicians. They just woke up one day and decided they wanted genocide and Third World War. No, this emerges out of a decayed, failed, outmoded capitalist system and the domination of the world by giant transnational corporations, the decline in the position of the United States, which for 35 years has waged endless wars to try to offset its economic decline, but those wars haven't offset its decline. So whether it's Biden or Trump, they're committed to such wars. They may have tactical differences where Biden wants to go against Russia first before going against China, and Trump prefers going against China directly, but they're both a dead end for the working class. And we're fighting to intervene as workers are drawn to revolutionary conclusions. That you're not going to change through appeals to their conscience. It requires that the working class overthrow these capitalist governments, establish a workers' government, genuine democracy in the hands of the workers, the working class, the dismantling of the war machines and the repressive state apparatuses, and the transformation of these giant global corporations into public utilities controlled collectively and democratically run by working people. That's not a utopian dream, it's a necessity. In the hands of this financial corporate oligarchy, they have no future for humanity. And we're fighting to bring that understanding into the working class.
If I just might add a quick point on that, because you're raising the question of a general strike. And I mean, you know, the SEP fights for the development in every form of the class struggle. And, you know, I think the experience has been universal among workers, the role of the trade union apparatus in isolating, suppressing. I mean, Jerry was talking about Fain, you know, his grandstanding with Biden and his support for, you know, genocide Joe followed the so-called historic stand-up strike in which most of the workers remained on the job and they rammed through contracts. Which have led to the immediately firing of thousands of workers. Jerry was at a protest last week, that weekend, of Stellantis workers who've been fired, rank and file temporary workers, and denouncing the UAW apparatus. Fain, you lied to us. So there has to be the development of the class struggle. We were also, the SEP was also intervening today. Jerry issued a statement on the walkout of Flint teachers who've been denied a pay raise after years of pay freeze. This is in the home of the Flint water crisis. There's supposedly no money for anything. The workers are going to fight, and you know, the SEP fights for the development of rank and file committees to break the stranglehold of the apparatus over the class struggle, and to really develop mechanisms through which workers can unify their struggles and carry out a real fight against against the corporate financial elite, not just in the U.S. but around the world. That's the purpose of the International Workers Alliance of Rank and File Committees, to really, create forms in which the struggles can not only be that they can that there can be the real development of the class struggle, and that also is the. But then within that, the development of an understanding among the working class that they're confronting not just one or another corporation or one or another company, but the capitalist system as a whole. So I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, but I think it is critical that the development of the class struggle really requires an offensive against this trade union apparatus.
Right.
Which is not just in the U.S. but around the world.
So, I know campaigns take a lot of money in our Citizens United capitalist world. Is there a plan to go to different states, to go to all 50 states? Is it easier to reach people? How are you I don't know what's your next step? Where are you going next? How are you meeting? I know in Michigan you have your feet on the ground, and I think you're possibly both from there, so that you have sort of a network of people you've been working with to create these rank and file committees, or to know what's happening. How about Kentucky or California? Are you coming out to California? We're both in California. Where are we going?
Come stay at my socialist apartment here.
We're going everywhere, wherever we can go.
Yeah.
And it's not just Jerry and I mean, we'll be doing as much traveling as we can, but this is a political party, and the Socialist Equality Party, our sister parties, will be fighting to develop this campaign in the U.S. and internationally. There are specific issues like where we're going to get on the ballot, and that depends on. In California, the number of signatures is so large. It's really impossible for a third party, to get on as an independent together.
We call that democracy.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and people don't really understand, what is required. In Michigan, we need to get 12,000 signatures to get on the ballot, and we approach the question of the ballot access as a political, a fight to develop political understanding, and obviously the campaign in Michigan is connected to the fight to develop an understanding of the working class. We're not just gathering signatures for the purpose of gathering signatures. As with every element of this campaign, it's about the development of a socialist understanding of the working class. Right. Since you raised, though, the question of funds, and I would say yes, everything requires money, and in part it depends on the support that we're able to get. I would encourage everyone watching this to go to socialism2024.org right now and make a donation. Where we can get on the ballot, where we can have meetings, where we can distribute leaflets, promote our campaign on social media. It all depends upon, first of all, yes, on resources, donate, and also the active support of everyone who, this is your campaign, to go to become involved. Jerry and I are not just we're not running for ourselves. We're running to develop a socialist movement in the working class, and it requires the support of everyone. And so I would just urge everyone who's watching to go to the website, make a donation as much as you can, and sign up to get involved. And if you're in California, help build the campaign in California. We'll get you material. We'll go out and promote. If you're in Tennessee, if you're in Virginia, that's we want everyone.
Sorry, we run a very professional organization here. StreamYard just kicks me out mid-show, so we don't have enough funds to get the super professional tier of StreamYard. Sorry, I missed out on the last minute. I'm so sorry. Continue.
I was just asking everyone to get involved in the campaign.
Yeah, yes. Can you give the website one more time for people?
Socialism2024.org. Socialism2024.org.
Here, and we'll put it in our in the description of the show for sure on YouTube, so that people can see. I know we've had you here for such a long time. We're so grateful. Or is there anything that we didn't get to that you want to make sure that we hit?
Well, you mentioned you had the WSWS arts editor David Walsh on
Yes.
the show before, and he just did a very important perspective on what was behind the mass interest in the Oppenheimer film, and making the point that there is, in fact, even though the issue of the danger of nuclear war is largely being concealed from the masses, there is, in fact, growing concern. And the fact that you have such a wide audience for a long, complicated film which raises scientific and cultural and political questions is an indication in the broader shifts in social consciousness. There's also an indication in more thoughtful efforts by writers and artists themselves. And these are processes: the pandemic, the genocide, the danger of nuclear war, which are shifting mass consciousness. And so our campaign, as Joe was saying, we are giving expression to an objectively revolutionary movement of the world's working class, the billions of people on this planet who cannot live any longer under capitalism, a system where 84 billionaires have more wealth than half of the people on the planet. It's driving millions into struggle, and we're seeking to make that objective process into a conscious political and revolutionary process.
Amen.
I would just add, Biden said in his State of the Union address the other day, well, the State of the Union address was a wake-up call, he said, to Congress. And by that he meant that it was a wake-up call to escalate war. I mean, I think, since the situation as a whole is a wake-up call to millions and millions of workers and young people all over the world, genocide, the expanding global war, the growth of fascism, dictatorship. I mean, I think people, as I said, many people are beginning to recognize that, there's something fundamental. It's in the nature of society, the whole political system, that, what is required is, in fact, is a revolution, social revolution. And that's what, we're fighting to develop that understanding. I would just say, that serious problems require serious solutions. And they require real, it's not, we're not running this campaign, based upon slogans. There's great questions that confront young people and workers who are being politicized right now. Great political questions, great historical questions. I mentioned just briefly what happened in the 20th century. The whole question of what socialism is. Socialism is the alternative to capitalism. I think people sort of understand that. But what is genuine socialism? That's so much bound up with the history of the 20th century. The Russian Revolution, Stalinism, our movement, the International Committee of the Fourth International, is the Trotskyist movement, the World Trotskyist movement. The Trotskyist movement originated in the fight against Stalinism, the counter-revolutionary betrayal of the Russian Revolution. And all these great questions, really in every country, the great historical questions are raised. And the point I'm making is, obviously we can't speak about all these questions here, but I do think, that they said, the workers and young people confront serious problems. Capitalism is normalizing barbarism, and the response has to really be, equal to the crisis, and that's what we're fighting to develop again in our election campaign. That understanding.
Well, I truly do think the public is ripe for an education on socialism, and I'm glad you guys are out there doing it. Between the pandemic, between the fight to stop fascism, and all we have to stop fascism is Joe Biden. That's the best the Democrats can do. The examples are right in front of the whole world. They just need to connect the dots a little bit to capitalism.
Well, Trump's greatest asset really is the reactionary character of the Democratic Party, and everything they've done over the past 3 years is, sort of nothing more than to elevate and politically strengthen Trump. Actually.
It's insanity. It's just one big reality TV show that we're all living in here. Yeah, I have to say, when I got the text last week or 2 weeks ago, when you made your announcement from one of your writers sent me, Mark Wells, and it did fill me with so much hope just to hear you both, and David North's also, his video, putting it all together, because all of these issues that are terrifying and they feel isolating because we've all been abandoned, but by giving voice to the intersectionality of it and the how we move forward, it gives me, and I think a lot of us, a lot of hope. So thank you. We really appreciate what you both are doing.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us on.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much.
so much. Please go visit the website. I want to get it exactly right. I know I just put it up. Will you say it again? I have brain synapse issues.
Socialism2024.org.
I just wanted to make sure. Socialism2024.org. Joe Kishore, Jerry White, thank you both so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you back anytime, and good luck in these next few months.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Whoops.
You got rid of the wrong person. We're going to make you hang
Joe,
out. And do
you
the
and I are going
shot
to take
on
it from
the wheel.
here.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night.